company is on a journey to success. No, actually, it's not true. Most companies are on a journey to failure. 3 out of 4 companies will, in fact, fail. But why is that? Why are some companies successful on this journey that they embark on, and most of them fail? But what leads companies to success is clearly, in part, because of their leadership. The leaders are the ones that set their intentions, that set their marker and goal for success, that map their strategy, that indicate the markers of where they want to go, get the right people in the vehicle along with them, and drive. So the leaders are what are key to success. But as leaders driving these companies down this journey, perilous journey with probable death, most leaders are also thinking intentionally about where they're going. Some leaders are thinking intentionally about how they're doing it. What you do as a leader, how you follow the rules of the road, are your values. The rules of the road mark whether you'll stay centered. Following the rules of the road help you intrinsically decide to follow certain ethics and courtesy and different speed limits and the ways that you're going to treat other people who are also on this journey. Your own values are also what's going to cause you to comply or not with explicit impositions of road rules like laws or regulations, whether you comply with them actually or the spirit of them. That is all up to you as a leader and how you decide to live your values, what rules you decide to follow on this road. And everybody has values, whether you say them out loud or whether you don't. But 90% of all companies actually say them out loud. 90% of all companies have explicit statements of values. The problem is that only 24% of employees believe those values. Less than 24% of companies make any effort to explicitly elucidate what living the values would look like through tangible behaviors, and even less companies hold staff, and particularly leadership, accountable for living those values. This gap is a huge problem. This gap in the values that we say we have and the way we live our values is a huge problem because living these values is the marker that will help you be successful. And so what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how we got here, how we got to a point where the value of a company is related to its values, and we're going to talk about how you might consider operationalizing these values. So we're going to start in the Neanderthal times, 1962. Milton Friedman, I'm sure all of you read his book on capitalism. He won a Nobel Prize for it. And he said that social responsibility is fundamentally a subversive doctrine. He said that there is one and only one social responsibility of business, and it is to use its resources and engage in activities designed to increase profit. That's the only reason for a company to exist. The law followed suit, and the law also told us with shareholder supremacy that shareholder value is really what matters most in a company. That has all changed in just the last few years. The U.S. Business Roundtable, which is the largest business association in the United States, recently issued a new statement on the purpose of a company. This was a statement signed by 181 CEOs of the largest corporations in the United States. And in this statement, they all acknowledged that the past statements had their purpose as only shareholder value and maximizing that, but they've decided to intentionally depart from that. And now they've decided that the purpose of a company is to look at broader stakeholders and to see a larger impact that the company has. That trend continued globally, and in 2020 at the World Economic Forum, they issued the Davos Manifesto. This was signed by over 3,000 global corporate and government leaders. And this statement specifically says, the purpose of a company is to engage all its stakeholders in a shared and sustained value creation. In creating such value, a company serves not only its shareholders, but all its stakeholders, employees, customers, suppliers, local communities, and the society at large. These statements never said this kind of thing before. And then we saw after that a movement around ESG and sustainability and corporate responsibility in ways that we hadn't seen before. This is really exciting. It's exciting for me because I started my career as a corporate attorney, and then I became a human rights advocate, and it felt like for most of my career, these spheres were completely segregated and separate. And now they're starting to come together. And the value of a company is being seen in how it lives its values. This is also exciting because companies have huge influence. Of the world's 200 largest economic entities, 78% of them are companies, not countries. To me, this was amazing when I saw this, because I think that we rightfully turn to our governments to help solve social problems, help deal with social ills, the environment, all of these kinds of things. Rightfully, they should be involved in that. However, from a pure economic capacity perspective, it's companies that have more capacity, and I would argue more responsibility to help address society's social problems. Another reason it's exciting is because companies have a very unique capacity to understand interdependence in the world. Governments, by design, are territorial, and they're thinking about themselves and their own people, but companies have a really unique capacity to understand how intertwined, interdependent we are as a globe. For example, the war in Ukraine caused global grain shortages that affected profits of many companies and people all over the world. Climate-related weather events are expected to cost businesses $1.3 trillion by 2026. The breakout of COVID in China infected the entire world, disrupted supply chains, and impacted workforces. And the US's failure to regulate US-based social media companies directly enabled the genocide of the Rohingya people in Myanmar. Companies have a tremendous influence and capacity to make a difference in the world, to not only make profit, but to have purpose. But so what are values exactly, and how do we live them? Values are the compass that guide your journey to succeed. We talked about the driver before, the leader who follows the road rules that is guided by values. And it doesn't mean that you're never going to waver. It doesn't mean that you're not going to accidentally speed or that you're going to periodically get pissed off at the person next to you. We're not perfect with our values. I know I'm not perfect with my values. But the degree to which we try to live them and are intentional about that impacts how we are successful as leaders. But they're not values unless you're willing to sacrifice people or profit. They're not. They're platitudes. Because our values aren't our values really unless we're tested. And when we're tested, we'll be asked to have to make hard choices that might involve people or profit. So I'm going to tell you the tale of two values. These are two different value statements of two different companies. I'd like to ask you to look at them super carefully and see if you can tell the difference. Okay, there's actually no difference between them. They're just platitudinal statements. They look like almost every other statement of every other company. I don't think you'll see a whole lot different, but whose they are is different. The company on the left is Enron. And for those of you who don't know, Enron died in a blaze of corrupt and fraudulent glory. The second company is a law firm named Arnold & Porter, and this is where I began my career at this place. Now, Arnold & Porter, like every company, of course, and like every individual, isn't perfect on values, but they were intentional on values. And it's one of the largest law firms and one of the oldest law firms in the world. By all business metrics, they are successful. As a young associate, I had to go through a really, really intensive values orientation process. I couldn't really tell you what the value statement was. I don't actually remember it. But I could tell you how we were supposed to model the values and how they were to be lived. I can tell you the story that we were told at the law firm about how when the firm in the 1950s represented the McCarthy Five, which was a group of individuals in the United States being accused of being communist at a time when the government and the public was on a witch hunt to find communists. And so to defend freedom of speech, Arnold and Porter represented pro bono the McCarthy Five. When they did this, they lost a huge number of clients. Clients walked away from the firm. They lost a tremendous amount of profit. But the firm told this story to let us know that the firm would sacrifice profit in order to live its values. We also were told stories of pro bono legal representation that cost the firm millions and millions of dollars, but that they would do that because it was worth it. We were told stories of partners who were publicly accused by their very high-profile clients of doing things that caused their disgrace when it was absolutely a lie, but the partner couldn't say anything in defense because they were abiding by the ethics of client-attorney privilege, lost all their clients, and had to go on a one-year sabbatical to recover mentally as well as professionally. This was the line that the firm towed on its values, and it taught me a lot. So how do we operationalize our values? It's nice to talk about it, it's nice to have a platitude, it's nice to tell stories about your values, but how do you really systematically operationalize them? There is a process. There's a 5-step process. You define your values first and foremost. Nice statements are nice. They are a start and they are helpful, but they're insufficient unless we also define the competencies that go along with those values and then the behaviors that are expected that reflect those competencies. Then we've got to filter for our values, hire the right people, engage with the right partners, launch the right products. There's a filtering process that's important. Then there's an orientation process. Every time you have a new hire, every time you have a product launch, every time you have a project launch, what are you doing to remind everyone at the beginning of this process of your values? Then there's reinforcement. What are the rituals? What do you do at every staff meeting? What awards are you giving to recognize people who are living their values? What are these small, everyday things that you do in order to help remind everybody that these are the values and the company means it? Then you have to enforce the values. There's got to be accountability. People have to have values, the way they do their work as a part of the performance appraisal. Leaders have got to be held accountable. You know, so many leaders, definitely including myself when I was CEO, kind of live in a bubble of ignorance around the actual view of people on values and how they're being operationalized, how they're being lived, and how they're being implemented, and it's just impossible to see ourselves. We can't, and we have to get feedback, we have to have assessments done, and we have to sometimes hear really hard things about ourselves that tell us we're not landing in a values-aligned way, even if we have the best of intentions. So this process of defining and filtering and orienting and reinforcing and enforcing is a continual process that we have to engage in. And these values and that continual process then form the core and the heart of the company. And from that come policies and practices and people and products that are all in alignment with values. So living our values, operationalizing our values, leading with values is not easy. It's deeply uncomfortable. It requires us to grow and learn and improve continuously. It also takes time and it takes resources. It may take sacrifice. You have to let go of certain profit. You have to let go of certain people in order to be values aligned. But it's well worth it. Because if you're values aligned and you're traveling on this journey, you will be successful. And you'll leave a trail of positive impact in society behind you. Thank you.
Think of sharing what you know.